So here's the truth about horses in the Book of Mormon. Critics have claimed that the Book of Mormon cannot be true because of the presence of horses in the Americas, when many scientists believe that horses did not exist at this time. But the reality is this is not a problem for the Book of Mormon. Not only do we have an answer for this, we actually have 3 answers or possible explanations that are widely used by anthropologists and archaeologists in the field when it comes to dealing with anachronisms, or something in a text that's placed out of time. So here's a breakdown of 3 possible reasons why horses might be mentioned in the Book of Mormon, and the first one has to do with archaeology. You actually might be surprised at what the archaeological record actually has to say about horses in pre-Columbian America. The Book of Mormon talks about horses in the Promised Land, but for a long time, the evidence indicated that horses had gone extinct in the Americas during the Ice Age, long before the Book of Mormon took place. Some new evidence suggests that the extinction date of North American horses could have been much later, even during the Book of Mormon. In October of 2022, an article in the Texas Journal of Science published archaeological findings on a cave near Cedral, San Luis Potosí, Mexico, which contained specimens of a horse. Now, the organic remains in these stratigraphic layers were carbon dated to between 1660 BC and 1165 AD. And these are definitely not the remains of Spanish horses that got mixed up in older layers and older debris, because the bones on these specimens belonged to either the Equus mexicanus or the Equus conversidens, which are extinct North American horse species. The radiocarbon dates found near these horse remains line up very closely with the chronology of horse references in the Book of Mormon, such as in Ether 9, 1 Nephi 18, Enos 1, Alma, 3 Nephi. There's reason to be cautiously optimistic about this development. There wasn't enough viable collagen in the horse specimens that date to Book of Mormon times to carbon date the bones themselves, but the researchers were able to carbon date organic material right next to the horse bones, which is fairly common practice when the collagen sample is insufficient, and the stratigraphy layers are well established, clean, and line up chronologically very well. This evidence possibly pushes the extinction of the North American horse way later than many scientists have assumed. This is consistent with a growing body of evidence that suggests that at least some pockets of horses may have survived for several millennia after the end of the last ice age. Okay, so number 2 is lone shifting. This could also account for the presence of horses in the Book of Mormon, and here's what I mean. This is a horse. Doesn't look like a horse, doesn't function like a horse, not really genetically related to horses. But the word hippo literally means horse. Because when ancient Greeks encountered this exotic animal, they didn't know what to call it, so they called it a hippopotamus, which translates to river horse. It's got 4 legs, it's big, lives in a river horse. When indigenous American populations encountered the Spanish for the first time riding on these large 4-legged creatures, their records referred to them as deer because they didn't have another word for it. And yes, they sometimes even referred to the Spanish horses as tapirs. This is called a lone shift in anthropology, when a population applies a familiar word in their language to an unfamiliar animal or concept. It's not mental gymnastics. This is a well-known and documented phenomenon when populations migrate and come in contact with each other. So when the Book of Mormon talks about horses, even though many scholars believe that horses did not exist in the Americas at this time, one reasonable possibility among several is that when the Nephites from the Old World encountered an unfamiliar species in the New World, such as a deer or yes, even a tapir, they could have applied their familiar word horse to the unfamiliar animal they encountered. And lastly, number 3, the translation process could account for the presence of horses in the Book of Mormon. For example, neither candles nor candlesticks existed during the time of Jesus, but it would be pretty extreme to say that the entire Bible has no basis in history based on this one anachronism. Rather, this is a product of the King James translators using common words that they were familiar with in their day to describe different older concepts like clay oil lamps. And yet I have seen people claim that it doesn't matter how much evidence there may be for the Book of Mormon because of the presence of even one anachronism. For example, the Book of Mormon mentions horses, even though many scholars believe that horses did not exist in the Americas at this time. Now, there are several ways to address this, but to be more careful and critical in our thinking, we could consider that the word horse might be a product of translation. Joseph Smith, as an active participant in the translation process, could have used the familiar word horse to describe an unfamiliar word or animal that he came across while translating the gold plates. The King James translators did this all the time with candles, compasses, Easter in place of Passover, wine bottles. Whenever you bring up horses in the Book of Mormon, chariots inevitably come up. Many scholars believe that horses did not exist in the Americas at this time, and yet somehow these non-existent horses are pulling chariots. In addition, wheeled chariots aren't currently tested archaeologically in ancient America. But specifically for chariots, we should be careful what assumptions we bring to the text. If you closely read the text, not once do horses in the Book of Mormon pull chariots. So let's break it down. Chariots show up exactly 3 times in the Book of Mormon in these places. It's true that in Alma there are 2 instances where servants prepare both horses and chariots together, and yes, this is a technicality, but the horses do not explicitly pull the chariots. What this means is that the animal referred to here doesn't necessarily need to be a draft animal, and the chariot doesn't necessarily need to be a wheeled vehicle that we typically picture. In fact, in the Song of Solomon, the word translated as chariot in the KJV is actually a rare Hebrew word, afiryon, which more closely means litter or palanquin, just showing how much a word can vary when undergoing translation. And litters are well attested in Mesoamerica and were used primarily by the nobility and elites, which is exactly how we see them being used in the Book of Mormon, such as when Lamoni uses his chariot on a formal state visit to his father. And as far as horses go, royal Maya processions were often known to include ceremonial animals accompanying the litter. So a draft animal is not pulling the vehicle, but rather a symbolic animal is with the vehicle while servants conduct the king forth. And if you read the Book of Mormon closely, that's reflected in the specific wording of the passage. This paints a very different picture than what we're used to in Arnold Freeberg or Minerva Teicher paintings, but for those with an open mind, it can deepen your understanding for what's going on here. Maybe instead of Ammon just riding shotgun, Ammon is once again demonstrating his humility by being one of the servants to carry the king on his shoulders. If you're curious about what the archaeology actually says about horses in ancient America, I would recommend reading this article in the Scripture Plus app in Alma chapter 18, verse 9. And to learn more, check out this article at Evidence Central.